Have you ever imagined commanding an entire army while governing a vast and rebellious territory? In the Roman Empire, this wasn't just a possibility. It was a reality that shaped the destiny of nations and tested the limits of authority. The Legati were not just battlefield leaders. In critical moments, they took on the role of provincial governors, deciding the fate of thousands. But what happened when one man's power extended beyond military control? When his political decisions and war strategies became a threat to Rome's very Senate. Picture this dilemma: a leader celebrated by his troops, revered for his military feats, yet surrounded by betrayals, intrigues, and Rome's constant surveillance. Each decision could strengthen his legacy or destroy everything he had built. How did leaders like Caesar and Agrippa balance the power of the sword with the diplomacy of the toga? And what happened when they chose to wield that power against those they were supposed to serve? These are stories of ambition, glory, and tragedy that altered the course of Roman history. Today, we'll uncover how the empire transformed its generals into governors, and how this fusion of authority forged heroes, conspirators, and sometimes enemies of Rome. From Agrippa, who solidified Augustus's power, to Sertorius, who defied the Senate itself, we'll explore the impact of this daring strategy. In today's video, you'll discover how the concentrated power of a Legatus governor was both a weapon and a risk for Rome. We'll reveal the decisions that shaped provinces, the conflicts that divided the empire, and the consequences of a policy that united sword and diplomacy. If you love stories filled with strategy, betrayal, and twists that shaped the Roman Empire, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss a single chapter of this fascinating saga, and you'll help spread Rome's legacy to even more people. From the early days of the Roman Republic, the role of the legatus was reserved for men who demonstrated unquestionable leadership on the battlefield. They were the strategists Rome relied on to consolidate territories and protect its borders. However, certain circumstances demanded that this role extend beyond warfare. The transition to the political governance of a province was not just a reward for loyalty, but a practical necessity in an empire where power and stability depended on military strength and diplomatic skill. How did a man of war transform his authority into effective governance? Consider the example of Julius Caesar, one of the most prominent figures in this transition. After his conquest of Gaul, Caesar not only ruled with a firm hand, but also reorganized local administration to benefit Rome while pacifying regional tensions. His military experience gave him not only the respect of his troops, but also a deep understanding of the territory and its political dynamics. This combination of strength and strategy was crucial to his success. But was Caesar an exception, or did others also employ this formula for leadership? Another significant figure is Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Not only did he lead troops in decisive battles like Actium, but he also demonstrated political acumen by transforming provinces and restructuring cities. Agrippa oversaw the administration of Spain and Gaul, while implementing infrastructure projects that secured Roman control and local support. Military expertise was the foundation, but the ability to forge political and cultural alliances made the difference. However, not all legati were equally successful in their transitions. The pressure came from all directions. Senators watched with suspicion, fearing that the accumulation of military and political power would create leaders too independent for Rome's liking. At the same time, local elites could resist Roman rule, challenging integration efforts. To make matters even more complex, maintaining the loyalty of the legions required governors to stay connected to their military roots while fulfilling their roles as civil mediators. How could one strike this balance without compromising either side? These challenges were only the beginning. The ascent to the governor's position was an opportunity for glory, but also a dangerous test. The same traits that made a legatus successful could turn him into a threat to central power. What happened when the weight of the sword and the responsibility of diplomacy clashed? This dilemma marks the starting point for understanding how central and local power collided within the empire. When assuming the dual role of military leader and civilian governor, the legatus faced a complex task: balancing the rigor of military campaigns with the subtlety of political negotiations. For many, this balance was a true minefield. On one hand, there was the need to maintain the loyalty of the troops, who saw the legatus as an unquestionable figure of authority. On the other, it was imperative to negotiate with local elites, pacify insurgencies, and implement Roman policies, avoiding unnecessary conflicts. But how could one satisfy these two very different worlds without compromising their own position? Living alongside provincial elites often brought unexpected challenges. Some local groups saw the appointment of a legatus governor as an opportunity to influence Rome through strategic alliances, while others resisted the centralization of imperial power. In such moments, the governor needed to use all his diplomatic skill to avoid uprisings and consolidate his authority. A clear example is Germanius, who, in addition to being a respected general, cultivated local alliances to stabilize rebellious regions. His leadership effectiveness lay in a combination of strength and subtlety, but not all legati were able to achieve this balance. Meanwhile, the legions also demanded constant attention. The bond between the legatus and his soldiers was based on trust and respect earned in battle. By assuming a political role, he risked appearing distant or weakened in the eyes of his troops. Some leaders, like Sertorius, faced internal uprisings when they tried to step away from direct command of the legions to focus on provincial governance. This dilemma created a cycle of tension where every decision could either alienate allies or reinforce enemies. How could one prioritize responsibilities without displeasing both sides? To complicate matters further, the eyes of Rome never ceased watching. The Senate, protective of its power, viewed with suspicion the growing prestige of a successful legatus governor. A notorious example is Pompey, who, after a series of military victories and efficient administrations, became so influential that he openly challenged senatorial power. This created a paradox. The very competence that Rome required for the position could turn a loyal ally into a political threat. There was, then, a fine line between fulfilling one's duty and crossing the limits tolerated by the Republic. And when tensions exploded, conflict was inevitable. The clash between the sword and diplomacy rarely resulted in a clean victory. Many legati were crushed under the pressure, while others found ways to consolidate their authority despite all adversities. But when this balance tipped dangerously toward military power, what would the consequences be? How would Rome react when these men began to appear more like autonomous rulers than representatives of central power? The rise of a legatus governor often carried the potential to disrupt the delicate balances of Roman power. Although the position was granted under the premise of protecting the interests of the Republic, there were times when these leaders became so powerful that challenging the Senate and even Rome seemed like a natural evolution. When Sertorius, a legatus governor in Hispania, decided to govern almost autonomously, his military skill and political charisma transformed him from a defender of the system into one of the Senate's greatest enemies. But what drove a trusted man to turn his back on Rome? The answer often lay within the power structure that the system itself allowed. Governing a province with independent military strength and political autonomy created leaders who accumulated prestige and resources, often surpassing the control the Senate could exert from a distance. Pompey, for example, was an emblematic case. After his victories in the East, he controlled vast armies and wealth, essentially becoming a sovereign within the empire itself. This generated an inevitable conflict with Republican institutions, which saw the centralization of power in a single figure as a direct threat to the survival of the Republic. Tensions culminated when the legatus governor began to challenge Rome directly. It wasn't just a political disagreement, but a matter of mutual survival. During the crisis with Julius Caesar, control over Gaul became a breaking point. Caesar's refusal to relinquish his military command and obey the Senate's orders led to the civil war that would transform the Republic. In this context, the fusion of military and political power not only changed the dynamics of governance, but also redefined Rome's fate. How prepared was the Republic to handle such crises? Beyond the obvious conflicts, there were also unexpected reversals. Some legati used the threat of their power to negotiate concessions rather than start rebellions. Others, however, succumbed to ambition or political isolation, becoming easy targets for intrigue and conspiracy. Sertorius, for example, was betrayed and assassinated by his own allies, highlighting the dangers of trying to balance military and political autonomy without consistent support from Rome. But were these examples exceptions or symptoms of a system that was beginning to fail at its core? Whether challenging directly or manipulating circumstances, the power of these leaders created a new paradigm within the empire. When the boundaries of loyalty and independence began to blur, Rome faced difficult choices. But the intrigues and consequences of these situations went beyond battles and direct confrontations. What secrets and mysteries lay hidden behind the scenes of this constantly tense system? The system that combined military and civil power in a single individual brought to light intrigues that silently shaped Rome's destiny. Far beyond declared battles and conflicts, the corridors of power were filled with conspiracies and secrets that often decided the future of provinces and even the empire. Governors like Lucius Cornelius Sulla, before becoming dictator, used their military position to eliminate political enemies and consolidate their influence. But behind the scenes, how many other plots were woven by lesser-known figures? Some of these intrigues involved unlikely alliances. Local elites, seeing opportunities in governors with absolute power, offered support in exchange for privileges. Other times, the Senate itself conspired to destabilize governors who seemed dangerously independent. The case of Catiline, although more tied to internal politics, exemplifies how the fear of a concentration of power could lead to drastic measures by the Roman aristocracy. How far was Rome willing to sacrifice the stability of the provinces to protect its central interests? But the intrigues weren't limited to politics. There were also the mysteries of personal motivations and the unforeseen consequences of decisions that, at first glance, seemed strategic. Caesar, when crossing the Rubicon, justified his act as defense against an unjust persecution. But what was the true extent of his plans? Were the civil wars the inevitable result of a system that allowed such a concentration of power? Or were the governors often just pawns in a larger game of aristocratic interests? Another intriguing factor was the long-term impact of this policy of power concentration. Even when a Legatus governor did not openly rebel, the mere fact of centralizing authority in a single individual created dangerous precedents. Some historians argue that this laid the groundwork for the rise of the empire, where military and political power came to be monopolized by a single man, the emperor. But before we reach this transformation, what happened to those who dared challenge the status quo? These questions create a fascinating scenario, where the consequences of intrigues and mysteries continue to echo through history. And when we look to Rome's future, the structural changes that emerge from this period challenge our understanding of how power truly operated. What happens when a system is so dependent on individual figures? Was this the harbinger of a new era, or the beginning of decline? If you were intrigued by the consequences of leaders concentrating both military and political power, imagine the even greater mysteries surrounding the Roman commanders and legions that simply vanished from history. What happened to Legio IX Hispana or Legio XXI Dioteriana? Was it betrayal, catastrophic defeat, or something even darker? Find out the secrets behind these lost legions and how their stories continue to echo through time. Click now and join us to uncover this fascinating enigma.